I was standing in a room full of polished shoes and quiet money when my ex-husband smiled and said, "This is my son." And my boy looked him straight in the eye and replied, "No, sir, I'm not." People didn't gasp, not out loud, but you could feel it like the air had shifted just a little, like something important had just cracked. I'll get to that, because that moment didn't start there. It started 19 years earlier, in a kitchen that smelled like burnt coffee and fear. I was 8 months pregnant when Daniel slid the divorce papers across our kitchen table. It was a Tuesday. I remember because the trash truck had come early that morning and the bin was still tipped sideways near the curb. I hadn't had the energy to drag it back. The overhead light buzzed faintly above us. That cheap fluorescent hum you stop hearing after a while until something like this makes everything sharp again. Daniel didn't sit. He stood across from me like he was delivering news at work. "I can't do this, Carol," he said flat. "I've got a promotion coming up. I've got opportunities. I'm not throwing that away." I stared at him, one hand resting on my belly. The baby shifted, slow, heavy. "Throwing what away?" I asked. He exhaled like I was the one being difficult. A kid right now, it's bad timing, you know that." I remember thinking bad timing, like we were talking about a dentist appointment. Then he pushed the papers closer. "I've already talked to a lawyer." Of course he had. I looked down at the top page, my name typed neatly, his already signed. The pen he'd placed beside it was one of those cheap blue ones we got in bulk. I picked it up. My hand shook so bad the tip scraped the paper before it even touched down. The ink bled slightly. Not because I was scared. Because I was angry. Angry at him. Angry at myself. Angry that I had really believed that love was enough to keep someone from walking out. I signed. No yelling, no scene. Just the quiet scratch of pen on paper and that buzzing light overhead. He took the papers, glanced at the signature, and gave a small nod like we'd just finished a transaction. "I'll have my things out by the weekend," he said. Then he grabbed his keys and left. The door clicked shut behind him. And just like that, the house felt bigger, emptier. I stood there for a long time, one hand still on my stomach, the other resting on the edge of the table where a worn spiral notebook sat open. That notebook had grocery numbers in it, diapers, milk, bus fare. I'd been tracking every dollar for weeks. I remember looking at it and thinking, well, that just got harder. I gave birth alone. Miami Valley Hospital, early morning, cold room, too bright. A nurse with kind eyes asked me father's name for the birth certificate. I shook my head. "There isn't one." She paused, then nodded like she'd heard that before. Labor was long, painful, the kind that strips everything else away until it's just you and your body and whatever strength you can find. And then, he cried. Loud, strong, angry almost. They placed him on my chest, and I remember laughing and crying at the same time. "Hi," I whispered. "Hi, baby." I named him Ethan. And in that moment something shifted inside me. The kind of shift you don't fully understand until years later. I wasn't alone anymore. Those first few months were a blur of exhaustion. Tiny apartment off Linden Avenue, 2nd floor. The stairs creaked every time I carried groceries up. I worked part-time at a grocery store down the street when I could get coverage for childcare. Later I picked up a receptionist job at a small law office, nothing fancy. Just answering phones, filing paperwork, making coffee. At night, after Ethan finally fell asleep, I'd sit at the kitchen table with that same spiral notebook. I'd write down every expense. Diapers, formula, rent. Sometimes I'd just stare at the numbers, trying to make them stretch further than they could. The only sound in that apartment most nights was the scratch of my pen and the hum of the refrigerator. I didn't cry much. Didn't have the time for it. When Ethan was about 8, he came home one afternoon quieter than usual. Set his backpack down, didn't go straight for the fridge like he normally did. I was at the stove stirring a pot of boxed macaroni. "What's wrong?" I asked. He shrugged. "Nothing." I let it sit for a minute. Then I turned the heat down and faced him. "Ethan." He looked at the floor. "A kid at school asked where my dad is," he said. I didn't know what to say. There it was. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and walked over. "What did you tell him?" He shrugged again, smaller this time. I said, "I don't need one." That hit me harder than anything Daniel had ever said. Ethan looked up at me, then eyes steady. "I have you, that's enough." I smiled. I think I said something like, "That's right." But later that night after he'd gone to bed, I stood in the kitchen with that same old notebook open in front of me, and I cried. Not because I was sad. Because I realized something. I couldn't afford to stay where I was. Not like this. Not if I wanted his world to be bigger than mine had been. The next morning I asked one of the attorneys at the office about night classes. That's how it started. Sinclair Community College, evening classes, legal studies. I'd leave work, pick Ethan up, make dinner, help with homework, and then sit at the kitchen table with textbooks spread out. He'd sit across from me sometimes coloring or doing his own assignments. More than once I looked up and found him asleep, head resting on an open book. One night I reached over and brushed his hair back. "I'm learning this so nobody can ever corner us again," I whispered. He didn't hear me, but I meant it. That spiral notebook changed over time. The first pages were numbers, tight, careful budgeting. Then came scribbled notes from class, definitions, case names I could barely pronounce at first. By the end it was a mix of both, survival and knowledge in the same place. Kind of like me. Years passed. I moved from receptionist to legal assistant, then to paralegal. Nothing overnight, nothing glamorous. Just showing up, learning, getting a little better each year. Ethan grew up the same way. Quiet, observant, sharp. He didn't talk much about not having a father. He didn't have to. We had our own rhythm. The day I graduated, he was 18. Community college auditorium, folding chairs, families packed in tight. I walked across that stage in a borrowed gown, my heart pounding harder than it had in years. When they called my name, I heard one voice louder than the rest. "That's my mom." I found him in the crowd, standing up, clapping like I'd just won something big. Wearing one of my old button-down shirts, sleeves a little short on him now. I smiled. Not because I felt like I'd beaten anything, but because I'd built something. I didn't become strong because I hated Daniel. Truth is, I didn't think about him much at all after a while. I became strong because I had someone watching me, someone learning from me, and I wanted to make sure the lessons were worth it. I didn't know then that 19 years later, Daniel would walk back into my life like he had every right to be there, and that the boy he left behind wasn't a boy anymore. 19 years later, my life didn't look anything like that little apartment off Linden Avenue. I was still in Dayton, still driving the same streets, still stopping at the same Kroger on Wayne Avenue some evenings. But I wasn't the same woman. I worked at a mid-sized law firm downtown, now nothing flashy but respected. Brick building, polished floors, the kind of place where people spoke a little softer and listened a little harder. My name was on files that mattered. And for the first time in a long time, my notebook stayed in my bag most days. I didn't need it the same way anymore. Ethan was 21. Tall, taller than me by a good 6 inches now. Broad shoulders, calm eyes. The kind of young man people instinctively trusted after talking to him for 5 minutes. He'd graduated early, smart like that. Now he was studying for the bar exam, working part-time at the same firm as a junior associate under supervision. Not because I got him in. Because he earned it. That part mattered to both of us. If you had asked me then, I would have said my life was steady. Not perfect, not easy, but steady. And at our age, steady is a blessing. The day Daniel came back, it was a Wednesday. Late afternoon, around 3:30. I remember because I had just poured myself a cup of coffee that had already been sitting on the warmer too long. It tasted burnt, but I drank it anyway. Habit. I was going through a stack of client files when I heard it. Shoes. Firm, deliberate steps across tile. There's a certain kind of walk you hear in an office, confident, practiced, like someone who expects doors to open. I didn't look up right away. Carol. That voice. It didn't hit me like a shock. It landed more like recognition. Something old, tucked away, suddenly pulled back into the light. I set my pen down. Then I looked up. Daniel Whitaker stood in front of my desk like no time had passed. Older, sure, lines around his eyes, a little gray at the temples. But still put together, expensive suit, polished shoes. The kind of man who'd done exactly what he said he would, chased his future. For a second, neither of us spoke. Then he gave a small smile. "You look good," he said. "You landed on your feet." I almost laughed. Not out loud. Just in my head. 19 years. And that was the first thing he said. Like he was checking on a project that had turned out better than expected. I did, I said simply. He nodded like that confirmed something for him. I always figured you would, he added. There it was. That tone. Not quite a compliment, not quite anything else either. I leaned back slightly in my chair. What do you want, Daniel? No small talk, no pretending. His smile tightened just a bit. Straight to business, then. I was in the area, he said. Thought I'd stop by. I raised an eyebrow. You don't stop by a law firm downtown unless you have a reason. He studied me for a second, like recalculating. Then he sighed. All right, he said, fair enough. He adjusted his jacket. I think it's time I meet my son. There it was. No apology, no explanation. Just a request. No an expectation. I didn't react right away. Didn't give him anything. Inside, though, something shifted. Not anger. Not exactly. More like clarity. 19 years of silence. No birthday cards, no calls, no questions. And now, I think it's time. I folded my hands on the desk. Why now? He hesitated. Just a fraction. Then he shrugged. I've been thinking about things, about legacy, about family. Legacy. I almost smiled again. I watched him carefully. The suit, the watch, the way he held himself. Successful on the surface. But there was something else there, too. A tightness around the eyes, a slight impatience under the calm. Like he needed this conversation to go a certain way. You've been thinking, I repeated. He nodded. I'm at a different place in my life now, he said. Things are shifting. There it was. Not love. Not regret. Need. What kind of shifting, I asked. He hesitated again. This time longer. Business changes, he said finally. You know how it is. I did. In our line of work, changes usually meant problems. Big ones. He stepped a little closer to my desk. I'm not here to cause trouble, Carol, he said. I just want to meet him, that's all. That's all. I let the silence stretch. In the hallway outside, someone laughed. A phone rang. Life going on like normal. Inside that office, though, it felt different. He still thought he was in control of the situation. Still thought he was setting the terms. He's not a kid, I said finally. Daniel frowned slightly. Of course not. He's, 19, 20? 21, I said. Something flickered across his face. Surprise. Maybe a little calculation. 21, he repeated. Wow. Yeah. Wow. He works here, I added. That got his attention. Here, he said. I nodded. Junior associate, studying for the bar. Now he really looked at me. Not the quick glance from before. A longer look. Like he was seeing something new. That's impressive, he said. It sounded genuine. For the first time since he walked in, something real slipped through. He did that, I said, on his own. Daniel nodded slowly. I'd like to meet him, he said again. Softer this time. Still not asking. But closer. I leaned back in my chair again. Studied him. All those years ago I had thought I knew this man. Thought I understood what mattered to him. Turns out, I only understood a part of it. The part that left. I'll talk to him, I said. Daniel let out a small breath. Good, he said. That's good. He reached into his pocket. Pulled out a business card. Set it on my desk. I'm staying at the Marriott downtown, he said. You can have him call me, or we can set something up. I didn't touch the card. Didn't need to. He straightened his jacket again. Looked around the office. You've done well for yourself, he said. I met his eyes. So have you, I replied. Another pause. Then he nodded once. I'll be in touch, he said. And just like that, he turned. Walked out the same way he came in. Confident, controlled. Like he'd just handled another piece of business. I sat there for a long moment after he left. The room felt quieter now. Even the hum of the air vent seemed louder. I looked down at the business card on my desk. Didn't pick it up. Didn't throw it away either. Just let it sit there. That evening I found Ethan in the kitchen at home. Leaning against the counter, flipping through a thick bar prep book. Same spot where he used to do homework as a kid. Different book. Same focus. You're home early, he said without looking up. Slow afternoon, I replied. I set my bag down. The old spiral notebook was inside, tucked between folders. I still carried it sometimes. Didn't always use it, but I liked knowing it was there. Ethan closed the book, looked at me. "What's up?" he asked. He always knew. Didn't matter how small it was. He just knew. I leaned against the counter across from him. Took a breath. "Your father came by today," I said. No build-up. No soft landing. Just the truth. Ethan didn't react the way most people expect. No shock, no anger. Just stillness. He nodded once. "Okay," he said. That was it. "He wants to meet you," I added. Ethan held my gaze. "Do you want me to?" he asked. Simple. Direct. No drama. I shook my head slowly. "This isn't about what I want," I said. "It's your decision." He studied me for a second. Long enough that I knew he was really thinking about it. "Why now?" he asked. I gave a small shrug. "Sounds like he needs something," I said. Ethan's mouth twitched slightly. "Yeah," he said, "that tracks." We stood there in the kitchen. Same room where I'd stood years ago holding a very different kind of conversation. This one felt steadier, stronger. Ethan pushed off the counter, walked over to the sink, ran some water, then turned it off again. Thinking. "Does he know anything about me?" he asked. "No," I said, "not really." Ethan nodded. "Good," he said quietly. He turned back to me. "Then I'll meet him," he said. I watched him carefully. "Are you sure?" He gave a small calm smile. "Yeah," he said, "I think I should." There was no anger in his voice. No rush. Just certainty. I nodded. "All right," I said. He picked up his book again. Flipped it open. Like the conversation was already settling into place. I stayed there a moment longer. Watching him. The man he'd become. The man Daniel had never known. And for the first time since that afternoon, I allowed myself a small smile. Not because I trusted what was coming, but because I knew one thing for sure. Daniel had no idea who he was about to meet. The next morning I got to the office earlier than usual. Downtown Dayton was still waking up. A few people in long coats hurrying toward the courthouse, steam rising off manhole covers, that gray Ohio light that makes every building look a little older than it is. I parked in the garage across from the firm, grabbed my bag, and stood there for a second before heading in. My stomach was tight. Not panic, not fear exactly. Just that old familiar feeling of bracing yourself. You'd think after 19 years a man wouldn't still have the power to unsettle you. But that's the thing people don't always understand. It isn't about love. It isn't even about hate. Sometimes it's just memory. The body remembers what the mind has already filed away. I went upstairs, unlocked my office, and sat down at my desk. Then I opened my bag and pulled out the spiral notebook. The cover was bent at the corners. The blue lines inside had faded on the older pages. Grocery lists, rent amounts, formula, school shoes, utility balances. Later pages had legal terms scribbled in the margins, notes from lectures, case citations, phone numbers, deadlines. My whole adult life was in that little book. I ran my thumb along the edge of the paper and shut it again. Then I set it in the top drawer. Work first. By 10:30 the firm was in full motion. Phones ringing, printers going, the reception area filling and emptying in little waves. I had 3 client calls before lunch and a draft motion to review before noon. Busy helped. Busy always helped. At 11:15 Ethan stopped by my office carrying a coffee in one hand and a file in the other. "Peace offering," he said, setting the cup down. I looked at it. "You put cream in this." "1 packet," he said. "You're welcome." I smiled a little. He leaned against the door frame. Navy tie, white shirt sleeves, buttoned. He looked so much like himself now that sometimes I had to remind myself I was looking at the same little boy who used to drag his blanket into the kitchen and curl up under the table while I studied. "You sleep all right?" he asked. "Some." He nodded like he already knew that meant no. Then he lifted the file in his hand. "Marcia wants this reviewed before 1. She also said if Mr. Colvin sends one more passive-aggressive email, she's retiring." I laughed. That woman has threatened retirement every spring since 2017. "True," he said, but this time she used all caps. He handed me the file. I took it, but I didn't open it right away. He noticed. His eyes shifted to my face a little more serious now. "You don't have to worry about me," he said quietly. I looked up at him. "I know." "Do you?" That made me smile for real. "A little," I admitted. He stepped farther into the room and lowered his voice. "Mom." I waited. He held my gaze for a second and said, "I know who he is." I didn't answer right away. "He wasn't done." "And I know what you did," he said. "You don't have to explain the whole thing to me." That hit me deeper than I expected. Because I had spent years trying to make sure he never carried the weight of my pain, never felt responsible for the choices his father made. I told myself protecting him meant leaving some things unsaid. But standing there listening to that grown man speak in that calm, steady voice, I realized he had seen more than I ever thought. Not every fact, but the truth of it. The long nights, the sacrifice, the way I pushed through things I would have collapsed under if I'd only been carrying myself. I swallowed and nodded once. "All right," I said. He gave me a small smile. Then he tapped the file in my hand. "Read page 6 first. Opposing counsel buried the good part." And just like that, he was back to work mode. He turned, headed down the hall, and I sat there for a moment looking at the doorway after he was gone. Not because I was emotional exactly. Just grateful. Deeply, quietly, fully grateful. Daniel called at 2:07 that afternoon. I let it ring twice before picking up. "Carol." His voice sounded warm, casual, like we were old co-workers who'd had lunch once or twice. "I spoke to Ethan," I said. "And he agreed to meet you." A pause. "Then good. He sounded relieved, more relieved than he probably meant to. "We're having a client mixer Friday evening," I said. "At the Schuster building. A lot of local firms, business people, some judges, board members. Ethan will be there." Daniel was quiet for half a second too long. "That seems public." "It is." "I was thinking dinner, something private." I leaned back in my chair. I wasn't. Silence. Then a low exhale. "Carol, I'm trying to reconnect with my son, not stage an event." "No," I thought. "You're trying to control the setting." Aloud I said, "Then don't treat it like a negotiation. Show up or don't." Another pause. I could almost hear him recalculating. "Fine," he said. "Friday. 7 o'clock. I'll be there." I hung up first. Friday came cold and clear. The kind of Ohio evening where the air bites your face the second you step outside, but the sky is so clean it almost looks polished. I got home a little after 5 to change. Our house was modest, 2-story, maple cabinets I'd saved for years to replace, hardwood floors that creaked in the hallway no matter what season it was. Nothing fancy, but everything in it had been chosen, repaired, paid for, or protected by me. Ethan was already there, knotting his tie in the front hall mirror. He'd swapped the office shirt for a charcoal suit. Clean lines, good fit, simple, no need to show off. He looked at me in the mirror. "You nervous?" he asked. I was halfway up the stairs with my heels in one hand and my garment bag in the other. "Are you—" He considered that. "No," he said. "Curious, maybe." That made sense. I went upstairs and changed into a dark green dress I'd worn to 2 fundraisers and 1 retirement dinner. Nothing dramatic, just tailored well enough to make me stand straighter when I put it on. I fastened a pair of small pearl earrings, looked at myself in the mirror and thought, well, you still clean up all right. Daniel would probably say something about that. That was his way, a compliment that somehow still put him above you. I slipped the spiral notebook into my bag before heading downstairs. Not because I needed it, because I wanted it with me. The mixer was held in one of the renovated reception halls inside the Schuster Center complex. High ceilings, warm lights, polished stone underfoot. Wine glasses, past appetizers. Men in navy suits talking about contracts and tax exposure. Women in fitted jackets speaking with the kind of practiced confidence that comes from years of having to prove you belong in rooms like that. My kind of room eventually. It hadn't always been. Ethan and I arrived together just before 7. The event was already humming. Low conversation, soft jazz from a speaker system hidden somewhere in the walls, the occasional sharp burst of laughter near the bar. There's a sound expensive events have, not louder than regular ones, just smoother, more cushioned. I checked in, greeted 2 partners, made quick talk with a probate judge I'd known for years, and took a sparkling water from a passing tray. Then I saw Daniel. He was near the bar, one hand around a glass of iced tea or bourbon, I couldn't tell yet, from across the room. Dark suit, red tie, that same polished posture. And beside him on the bar top sat a long rectangular gift box wrapped in glossy paper. I almost closed my eyes. Of course. When he saw us, his expression changed, brightened, smoothed out, public face fully in place. He came toward us with easy confidence. "Carol," he said with a nod, then turned to Ethan. "Ethan." My son gave him a polite, unreadable look. "Mr. Whitaker," he said. Not Dad, not Daniel, not even Sir. Just enough distance to make the point. Daniel covered it well, but I saw the flicker, tiny, fast. Then he smiled and held out the gift box. "I brought you something," he said, "just a small token." Ethan looked at it, then at him. "You didn't need to do that." "It's nothing," Daniel said. "Go ahead." Ethan took the box because refusing it right there would have made a scene too early. He lifted the lid. Inside was a luxury watch, silver, heavy, expensive. The kind of gift a man buys when he knows nothing about the person and hopes price can stand in for history. Ethan looked at it for one beat, then closed the box. "Thank you," he said. His tone was perfect. Polite, flat, impossible to read. Daniel seemed encouraged by that. "I thought a young attorney could use a proper watch," he said. "Something for the next stage of life." I took a sip of sparkling water so I wouldn't say what was in my head. Because what I wanted to say was, you missed 18 birthdays and landed on a watch. Instead, I stood there calm and watched my son handle himself. He set the box on a nearby cocktail table. "That's considerate," he said. "Again, perfect. No warmth, no disrespect, just enough rope." A managing partner named Neil Jameson came up a moment later, smiling, hand already out. "Carol, Ethan," he said, "good to see you both." Then Daniel turned on that social charm I remembered so well. "Daniel Whitaker," he said, shaking Neil's hand. "Old friend of the family." "Old friend?" I nearly laughed into my glass. Neil nodded politely, already half turned toward the next person. But Daniel kept talking. "Family means more to me these days than business, frankly," he said. "At some point you realize legacy is everything." Ethan's eyes moved to mine for the briefest second. Then back to Daniel. There was no expression on his face, just stillness. And somehow that was stronger than anger would have been. I heard ice clink softly in Daniel's glass as he lifted it. In the pause that followed, no one laughed. No one agreed. The sentence just hung there, thin and false. Then Neil nodded, once excused himself, and moved away. Daniel didn't seem to notice the chill. He put a hand near Ethan's shoulder, not touching exactly, but close enough to suggest familiarity. "We've got a lot to catch up on," he said. "Maybe after this we grab dinner, just us." Ethan looked at him calmly. "Maybe," he said. That one word had so little promise in it, I almost admired it. For the next 20 minutes, Daniel worked the room. That was the best way to describe it. He greeted people, dropped names, referenced board memberships, made polished little speeches about civic duty and business ethics. He was good at it, always had been. If you didn't know him, you might have thought he was solid, dependable. The kind of man who gave generously and mentored young professionals and remembered everyone's wife's name. That was the danger of men like Daniel. They didn't look cruel. They looked competent. At 7:42, I saw the shift. A cluster of people had formed near the center of the room. Partners, a few clients, 2 members of a nonprofit board, and a local business reporter who always managed to find these events. Daniel was in the middle of them, smiling, talking a little louder now. And then he did exactly what I had half expected and still couldn't believe. He reached for Ethan's arm and said clearly enough for the group to hear, "I want you all to meet my son." Everything in the room seemed to slow, not stop. Just narrow. I felt my pulse in my throat. This was it. This was the moment he thought would crown him. What he didn't understand was that the boy he abandoned had grown into a man who knew the difference between being claimed and being earned. And Daniel was about to learn it in public. I didn't move. Didn't rush in, didn't interrupt. That was one of the hardest things I ever learned as a mother, knowing when helping would actually get in the way. Daniel stood there in that soft golden light with one hand still half raised toward Ethan, smiling like he'd just completed a circle nobody else could see. A few people turned. A few more paused mid-conversation. Not enough to make it theatrical, enough to make it matter. Ethan looked at him for one long second. Then he gave the smallest nod. "Good evening," he said to the group. Calm, steady, professional. That was my son. He didn't lunge for moments. He let them come to him. Daniel seemed pleased by the lack of resistance. He shifted a little closer, all easy charm now. "Ethan's been making a real impression," he said to the group. "Sharp mind, good instincts, clearly got the Whitaker drive." There it was. That old trick. Step in late and claim credit for the finished product. One of the women standing nearby, Laura Henning from a local foundation board, smiled politely and said, "Well, that's nice." But even from where I stood, I could hear the thinness in it. The room hadn't leaned in with him. It had gone careful. Ethan set his untouched drink on a tray as a server passed. Then he straightened his cuffs. Little things, small movements, but I knew him. I knew when he was settling himself. Daniel kept going. "We're looking forward to spending some real time together," he said. "Too many lost years." That word lost. Like a set of misplaced keys. I felt something hot and quick move through my chest. Not enough to shake me, just enough to remind me the wound had scarred, not vanished. Then Ethan spoke. His voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," he said. Daniel's smile stayed in place, but only just. "Oh." Ethan glanced around the little circle, then back at him. "You introduced me as your son." A pause. And then Daniel chuckled softly, as if there might be some joke tucked in there. "Well, he said you are." No anger in Ethan's face, no strain, just that same level measured stillness. "I'm Ethan Whitaker," he said. "That part is true." The room got quieter. Not silent. These things are never silent in real life. There's always a glass being set down somewhere, a distant laugh from another corner, shoes on stone. But around that cluster of people, the sound seemed to pull back a little. Daniel took a sip from his glass. The ice clicked once against the side. And he asked. Ethan looked at him, really looked at him. Then he said, "But I'm not your son in any way that matters." Nobody moved. Laura Henning blinked. One of the younger associates nearly choked on his drink and covered it with a cough. Daniel lowered his glass slowly. Now, if Daniel had been a smaller man, smaller in ego, he might have stepped back right there. He might have smiled tightly, nodded, and saved what little dignity was left. But men like him almost always make the same mistake. They think confidence can outlast truth. His expression hardened around the edges. "That's not necessary," he said quietly. Ethan didn't flinch. "I think it is." I started walking then. Not fast, just enough to be there if the moment needed me. My heels sounded clean and measured against the stone floor, not dramatic, just present. By the time I reached them, the group had widened slightly, not fleeing, making room. Daniel saw me and his jaw tightened. "Carol," he said, like I had somehow caused his own voice to betray him. I took my place beside Ethan. Not in front of him. Beside him. That mattered too. Nobody spoke for a second. Then Daniel gave a tight little smile and tried to reset the room. "I think this is probably a family conversation," he said, glancing around. Ethan answered before I could. "No, sir," he said. "It stopped being private when you made it public." That landed. A man from one of the accounting firms looked down into his drink. Laura's lips pressed together the way women do when they've just decided who's telling the truth. Daniel turned to Ethan more fully now. His voice dropped. "I came here in good faith." Ethan nodded once. "Did you—" It wasn't sarcastic. That was the beauty of it. He sounded genuinely curious. Daniel glanced at me, then back to Ethan. "I'm trying to build something here." That was when Ethan gave the faintest, saddest smile I'd ever seen on him. "Build," he said. "That's an interesting word." He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and pulled out a large envelope. Plain, cream-colored, unremarkable. I knew what was in it. We both did. Not because we had staged some fantasy revenge in a dark room somewhere. Because after Daniel walked into my office and started talking about legacy, I went home, opened my old files, and checked every number. Support orders, missed payments, interest calculations under Ohio law, notices never answered, obligations postponed until they became habits. Facts, dates, totals. Nothing emotional about paper. That's why it hurts men like Daniel so much. Ethan held the envelope lightly between two fingers. Daniel's eyes dropped to it, then lifted again. "What is that?" he asked. Ethan's tone stayed courteous. "A summary," he said. 19 years of child support arrears, medical costs, educational expenses, and accumulated statutory interest. Prepared from court records and supporting documentation. A long pause. Daniel stared at him. Then he laughed once, short, disbelieving. "You're joking." "Number." The word came out flat and clean. Daniel's face changed then. Not red, not wild, just thinner somehow. As if all the charm had been peeled off in a single motion. "This is what this is about," he asked, looking at me now. "Money." I answered before Ethan could. "No," I said. "Money is the part you can count." That got his attention. For a second, all he could do was stare at me. Then he said lower, sharper, "So you set this up?" I shook my head. "You did," I said, "the minute you walked into my office and spoke about him like a missing asset." A couple of people shifted closer without meaning to. Human nature. Nobody wants to miss the moment a polished man starts cracking. Daniel looked at Ethan again as if he could still somehow pull this back. "This is ridiculous," he said. "You don't even know what happened back then." And that was the moment I finally understood how little he had imagined my son. Because Ethan didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse. He didn't reach for the biggest wound in the room. He did something much harder. He told the truth plainly. "I know enough," he said. "I know my mother worked 2 jobs when I was small. I know she studied at the kitchen table after midnight while I slept next to her books. I know she kept every receipt because there were years when $30 meant groceries or gas, not both." His eyes flicked once toward me, then back to Daniel. "And I know you weren't there. You could feel the room absorbing it. Not as gossip. As judgment." Daniel straightened, trying on indignation now because charm had failed him. "You think you know me from one side of a story?" Ethan's expression didn't change. "No," he said. "I know you from your timing." That one hit even harder than the envelope. Because it was true. Everyone there could see it. 19 years of nothing. Then an appearance in a room with judges, partners, clients, and donors. A luxury watch in a gift box. A speech about legacy. It would have been funny if it wasn't so insulting. Daniel glanced around, then maybe realizing for the first time how many eyes were on him. His voice dropped another notch. "You're making a mistake." Ethan extended the envelope. "If you want a relationship," he said, "start with accountability." Daniel didn't take it. Didn't touch it. Just stared at it like paper could burn. So Ethan lowered his hand and tucked the envelope onto the cocktail table beside that expensive watch. 2 objects sitting there together. One bought in 10 minutes, one built over 19 years. That image stayed with me. Daniel let out a breath through his nose and looked at me with open resentment now. "You poisoned him against me." There are accusations that still sting no matter how old you get. That was one of them. Not because it was true, because I knew how many nights I had worked to make sure it wasn't. I kept my voice even. "No," I said. I raised him without lying to him. That did it. That was the first time his face really slipped. Not enough for most people to name, enough for me. He looked suddenly older than when he'd walked in. Smaller, too, like somebody had let the air out of a version of himself he'd been carrying around for a long time. Laura Henning spoke then, soft but clear. "Daniel," she said, "I think maybe tonight isn't the night for networking." A couple of heads turned away immediately, pretending not to hear, which in a room like that is its own form of dismissal. He looked at her then, at the cluster of people around us, and finally at Ethan. He still wanted a way out that preserved him. I could see it. So could Ethan. That's why what he said next mattered so much. He didn't finish him off with something cruel. He gave him the truth and left him to do what he wanted with it. "I'm not stopping you from changing," he said. "I'm just not willing to pretend you already did." That was my boy. Not vindictive. Exact. Daniel swallowed once. His eyes moved again to the envelope and then away from it. For a second I thought he might finally say it. The one thing he should have said 20 years ago. "I'm sorry." But some people would rather lose everything than kneel to the truth. He picked up his glass instead. Set it down again almost immediately. The ice made a small dry sound. Then he looked at me. There was anger there, shame too, and underneath both something else, something almost like confusion. As if he truly couldn't understand how the people he had dismissed had become the strongest ones in the room. I met his gaze and said the only thing I wanted to say. "We didn't ruin your future, Daniel. We just lived ours without you." No dramatic pause after that. No applause. Real life doesn't work that way. Just stillness. He looked at Ethan once more, but Ethan had already stepped back from him, not with fear, not with hostility, with finality. That was worse. Daniel adjusted his cuffs, picked up neither the watch nor the envelope, and muttered something like, "This isn't over." But even he didn't sound convinced. Then he turned and walked out. Same polished shoes. Different man. Not because we had broken him. Life had probably been working on that for years. We had just made it visible. The room stayed quiet another second. Then somebody from litigation, bless her blunt little heart, said, "Well..." A few nervous laughs fluttered and died. Laura touched my arm gently. "Are you all right?" I looked at Ethan. He gave me the smallest nod. And I realized I was more than all right, actually. Steady. Lighter. Like a door I'd been holding shut for 20 years had finally stopped pushing back. Ethan picked up the envelope, left the watch sitting there, and turned to me. "You want to go?" he asked. I smiled. "Yes," I said, "I do." We thanked the people who needed thanking, said our good nights, walked through that warm, expensive room and out into the cold Ohio air. The doors closed behind us. The city sounded ordinary again. Traffic, wind, a siren in the distance. Ethan slid his hands into his coat pockets and looked up at the dark sky for a second. Then he glanced at me. "You okay?" I laughed softly. "Yeah," I said. "I think I really am." He nodded. We started toward the garage together, our steps echoing on the sidewalk. For a moment, neither of us said anything. Then I said, "You didn't have to do that the way you did." He looked at me sideways. "I know," he said, "I wanted to." A few more steps. Then he added, "Also for the record, that watch was ugly." I laughed so hard I had to stop walking for a second. Not because it was the funniest thing I'd ever heard. Because sometimes relief comes out sounding like laughter. When I caught my breath, I slipped my hand through his arm the way I used to when he was a teenager and pretended not to like it. He didn't pull away. We kept walking. And somewhere between the Schuster Center and the parking garage, I realized something simple and strange. I had spent years thinking closure would feel bigger, louder, more dramatic. But it didn't. It felt like this. Cold air, sore feet, my son beside me, a quiet heart. That was enough. More than enough. By the time we reached the parking garage, the worst of the cold had settled into my knees. That happens now. You hit 50 and your body starts keeping score in ways it never used to. Ethan unlocked the car for me first, the same quiet way he did most things. No performance, no fuss, just consideration built into him so deeply it came out like breathing. I got in, set my bag on the floor, and looked down at it for a second before buckling my seatbelt. The spiral notebook was still inside. For one strange moment, I wanted to pull it out right there in the garage and just hold it in my lap. Not because I needed comfort. Because I wanted to feel the whole distance between then and now. Ethan started the engine and turned the heat on. We sat there a second while the vents woke up. Then he looked over at me and said, "You hungry?" And that's how real life goes, isn't it? One minute you watch your past walk out of a room humiliated. The next minute your son is asking if you want a sandwich. I smiled. "Starving," I said. "Good," he said, "because I could eat an entire rotisserie chicken with my bare hands." That made me laugh again. We ended up at a little diner in Kettering we both liked. Vinyl booths, weak coffee, pie rotating slowly in a glass case by the register. The waitress called everybody honey, whether she meant it or not. We slid into a booth near the window. Ethan loosened his tie. I kicked off my heels under the table for a minute and flexed my toes. The waitress came by with menus, then looked at Ethan and said, "You look like your mama." He grinned. "That works out for me." When she walked away, I looked at him for a second longer than usual. He noticed. What he said. I shook my head. Nothing. That wasn't true exactly. What I was really thinking was this: Daniel had spent 19 years missing the best parts. Not the achievements, not the degrees or titles or the suit and the polished voice. The real parts. The way Ethan always held doors open without thinking. The way he read the room before he spoke. The way he could make me laugh when I didn't even realize how tightly wound I'd gotten. The way he had become a good man. That wasn't an accident. And it sure as hell wasn't inherited from some speech about legacy over a glass of bourbon. We ordered club sandwiches and fries. Because after a night like that, nobody needs salmon on a bed of arugula. For a few minutes, we didn't talk about Daniel at all. We talked about work, about whether Marcia really meant it this time about retirement, about a judge Ethan had observed that week who apparently had a habit of cleaning his glasses whenever opposing counsel annoyed him. Normal things. I appreciated that more than I can explain. Then, somewhere between the sandwiches arriving and the second cup of coffee, Ethan looked at me and said, "Did he ever send anything?" I knew what he meant. Once I said, "A birthday card when you were 3, no money in it, no note besides his name." Ethan nodded. "That tracks too." I smiled faintly. "You say that a lot. Because apparently the man is extremely consistent." That got me. I laughed into my coffee. Then we both got quiet. Not awkward, just thoughtful. Finally he said I wasn't angry tonight. I looked up. "No." He shook his head. "Not really. I thought I might be, but mostly—" He searched for the word. "Mostly I just felt sorry for him." That surprised me a little, not because it was soft, because it was true. I sat back and studied his face. He looked tired now, the adrenaline gone, younger somehow without all that careful control sitting on top of him. Why, I asked. He shrugged. Because he walked into that room thinking he could claim something he never built. That's sad. I let that settle between us. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said, "it is." He took a bite of his sandwich, chewed, swallowed. Then he looked at me and asked the question I knew had been waiting all evening. "Why didn't you ever go after him harder?" I didn't answer right away. The waitress came by to refill our coffee. Somebody dropped silverware in the kitchen. A country song hummed softly from a speaker somewhere near the pie case. I wrapped both hands around the mug and said I was tired. Ethan listened. "When you were little, every hour mattered. Every dollar mattered. I kept records. I followed the orders that were in place. I pushed when I could. But a lot of the time—" I exhaled. "A lot of the time, surviving took everything I had." He nodded slowly. "I figured. I didn't want my whole life to become chasing a man who had already shown me what he was. That came out more plainly than I intended, but maybe plain was right." Ethan leaned back. "I'm glad you didn't," he said. "You are?" "Yeah." He picked up a fry, pointed it at me. "Because if you had made your whole life about him, you wouldn't have had time to build yours. Sometimes your children say something so simple and so correct it makes you wonder why you spent years trying to explain life to them." I smiled. "That's annoyingly wise. I get that from you too." When we got home, the house was quiet and warm. I changed into flannel pajama pants, and one of my old University of Dayton sweatshirts, washed my face and stood in the bathroom for a minute looking at myself in the mirror. The makeup was gone, the earrings were on the counter, my hair had fallen flat from the evening. I looked tired, but I also looked like myself. No performance left, no room full of people, no careful posture. Just me. I went downstairs and found Ethan in the kitchen pouring himself a glass of water. The gift watch box sat on the counter. I stared at it. "You brought it home?" I asked. He looked over his shoulder. "Oh," he shrugged. "Yeah, it was on the table next to the envelope. I figured if I left it there, someone would steal it." I walked over and opened the box again. The watch gleamed up at me under the kitchen light. Expensive, cold, meaningless. Ethan took a sip of water. "What should I do with it?" I closed the lid. "Sell it," I said. "Put the money toward your bar prep loan." He grinned. Now that he said feels poetic. I pointed at him. "Don't get literary on me. I'm too tired." He laughed. Then his face softened a little. "Mom." I looked at him. "You really okay?" There it was again. That question. Asked more honestly at midnight in a kitchen than it had been under chandeliers 2 hours earlier. I thought about it. Really thought. Then I nodded. "Yes," I said, "I am." He studied me for a beat longer, then seemed satisfied. "Good," he said, "I'm going to bed." As he passed me, he touched my shoulder. Quick, natural, the kind of touch you don't forget because it isn't trying to be memorable. Then he went upstairs. I stayed in the kitchen. The house creaked once as the heat kicked on. And finally, after all the noise and memory and tension of the last few days, I pulled the spiral notebook out of my bag. I sat at the table and opened it. The first page still had a grocery list from 20 years ago. Milk, bread, diapers, eggs. My handwriting looked younger then, tighter, more careful. I turned pages slowly. Bus fare, utility bill, formula. Then later chapter notes, legal definitions, court deadlines, half-finished to-do lists, Ethan's dentist appointment, a reminder to buy poster board for a 6th grade history project, tuition figures, a note to myself that just said, keep going. That one got me. Not in some dramatic tears down my face kind of way. Just quietly. Because I remembered the woman who had written it. She was scared, broke, lonely, angry in ways she barely had time to feel. But she kept going anyway. And that woman sitting under a buzzing kitchen light with a sleeping child in the next room had no idea what was coming. She didn't know she would become good at her job. She didn't know her son would grow into someone steady and kind. She didn't know that one day the man who walked out would walk back in and find no place left for himself. She only knew what was in front of her. The next bill, the next class, the next morning. That was enough. I closed the notebook and rested my hand on the cover. Then I laughed softly to myself. Because after all those years of keeping score, what mattered most had never fit on a page. Not dignity, not peace, not the kind of love that gets built in ordinary days and small choices and tired nights when you do the right thing anyway. Daniel thought success was something you displayed. I learned it was something you lived. And Ethan, well, Ethan was the clearest proof of that I could imagine. Daniel did reach out once after that. An email. Short, stiff, asking to continue the discussion in a more appropriate setting. I stared at it for maybe 10 seconds, then forwarded it to my personal folder and never answered. The legal matter would proceed however it needed to proceed. Through attorneys. Through paper. Through the same system he had trusted when it protected him and ignored when it demanded something back. But me, I was done. Not in a dramatic scorched earth kind of way. Just done. That may be the most satisfying feeling in the world once you've earned it. To stop carrying what no longer belongs to you. To stop rehearsing old conversations. To stop wishing someone had been better. I didn't forgive him that week. I didn't suddenly become one of those women who says everything happens for a reason. Some things happen because somebody is selfish. Some damage is just damage. But not all damage gets the last word. That part matters. Because I know there are women listening to this, women who were left dismissed, underestimated, talked over or forced to build with 2 hands what should have been carried by 4. And if that's you, then you already know this story isn't really about one smug man getting embarrassed in public. It's about what comes after abandonment. It's about who you become while nobody is clapping. It's about the private years that make the public moment possible. That's the part people miss when they look at women like us. They see the calm, the competence, the finished version. They don't see the boxed macaroni, the late bus, the cheap pens, the nights you sat up at the kitchen table trying to make numbers behave. They don't hear the refrigerator humming at 1 in the morning while you figure out how to survive another week. But that's where your life gets built. Not in the revenge. In the rebuilding. And if revenge comes at all, it usually doesn't look the way people expect. It isn't loud, it isn't wild, it isn't even especially glamorous. Sometimes it's just this. The man who left comes back expecting to find ruin. And instead he finds he's the only thing that no longer fits. That was my revenge. Not hurting Daniel. Outgrowing him. Completely. A few days later, Ethan came by after work with takeout from our favorite place on Smithville Road. He set the bag on the counter and said, "I got you the low min you like." I took it from him and smiled. "That's love right there." "I know," he said. Then he pointed to the old notebook which was sitting on the counter because I hadn't put it away yet. "You still keeping that thing?" "I don't know," I said honestly. He picked it up, flipped through a couple pages, then handed it back carefully. "You should," he said. "It's proof." "Proof of what?" He looked at me like the answer was obvious. That we were never what he thought we were. I swallowed around the lump that rose so suddenly it surprised me. Then I nodded. "Yeah," I said, "maybe I will." We ate lo mein at the kitchen table. Talked about work, the bar exam, whether the Browns would disappoint everybody yet again. Ordinary things. Good things. And sitting there across from my son, I understood something I wish I could go back and tell that younger version of myself. You will not always feel this scared. You will not always feel this alone. One day the life you build will hold you up. One day the child you worry over will stand beside you. One day the past will knock on your door and find it no longer has a key. That doesn't erase what happened, but it changes what it means. If you've ever had to rebuild your life piece by piece, then you know strength rarely looks dramatic while you're living it. Sometimes it just looks like getting up again tomorrow. If this story stayed with you, I hope you'll share it with someone who needs it and stay with me for the next one. Thank you for listening.